France 24 Chief International Affairs Editor Robert Parsons. Rob, it seemed 24 hours ago like the election of Alexander Prokopchuk, that former Russian Interior Ministry general, seemed like a done deal.
It looked rather like it, and certainly that's what many of the delegations to Interpol were saying, including the British. But something happened in the last 24 hours to turn things around, and in part I think it was US pressure and the threat from some countries, for instance Lithuania, that they would pull out of Interpol if the election of Mr. Prokopchuk went ahead. But the key obviously is the United States. Who pays for Interpol? Well, one of the biggest payers, something like close to 10% of its budget, comes from the US. So the US has serious clout. Who are some of the other big payers? Well, after the US, Germany, France, Japan, none of them interested in the Russian getting the job either. So I think perhaps it was a question of people in Interpol saying, look, we see which side of the bread, which side of the bread is buttered. We're going to go for the guy who pays the money. I mean, maybe it's as simple as that. I mean, who knows in the end? It was interesting, too, that the Russian reaction wasn't perhaps as angry as one might have anticipated, given the turnaround. And perhaps the Russians have said, well, perhaps later in a year's time, when the really important job at Interpol comes up for the Secretary General, perhaps that's something we can go for seriously this time and just forget about the presidential role, which is more ceremonial.
That's right. The president's role is more ceremonial than the Secretary General.
Yeah, and that could turn out to be important. I mean, it's early days yet. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but maybe something has been going on behind the scenes, and the Russians are putting their eggs in the Secretary General basket now, a much more influential position. But maybe it is simply that at this stage, a majority of countries who are members of Interpol, and there are now 194 of them, simply see Russia as not being the sort of responsible country you want to hold the presidency. It is not regarded by many of the most influential countries in the world as being what you would call a rule of law country. And you want a rule of law country to be running a position, an organization as important to international justice and the fight against crime and terrorism as Interpol.
All right, well, joining us from the University of Buckingham, Anthony Glees, who heads its Center for Security and Intelligence Studies. Thank you for joining us here on France 24.
It's a pleasure.
What was your reaction initially when you saw that a Russian was the favorite to head Interpol?
Well, I thought this was an outrageous suggestion, and it showed that whoever put his name forward was seriously out of touch, particularly with public opinion in the United Kingdom. It was like putting the fox in charge of the henhouse. And I know what you're saying about ceremonial roles and executive roles and all of that. But the bottom line was that given the way that Russia has been behaving, particularly towards the United Kingdom, for many, many months now, the idea that there would be a Russian head of Interpol would cause the British government to walk away from it. And as you've mentioned, not just the British government. The institution would collapse, and many people would say it deserves to collapse in any case, given what happened in Beijing to a previous Interpol head. So it was the credibility of the institution, the credibility of the organization, and I don't think it will ever countenance a Russian head in any capacity, ceremonial or otherwise.
Yeah, one of the big remits for Interpol is issuing those red notices that tell various policing agencies around the world to apprehend people who are moving across borders who are of interest to specific countries. And Russia had been accused of abusing the red notice system. How do you change it?
Well, I think there is some misconception about what the red notice system is. It isn't actually an international arrest warrant. It's a notification to a national police and security agency that a particular individual may be wanted by another member of Interpol. But it is not an arrest warrant, and it certainly does not indicate a willingness to extradite somebody. Interpol and Europol are repeatedly confused with each other, but they are very different. The European arrest warrant that is a very effective lawmaking tool, and that does put a duty on the arresting country to facilitate quickly the extradition of the individual wanted by another member of Europol. That's a serious piece of paper. These red notes, whatever they are, they count for far less. What they can do is stigmatize people. Those who are subject to them will feel persecuted, rightly or wrongly, by the government, by the national police agency that has issued them. And that is unpleasant. They have a psychological importance. And of course, Russia has used and manipulated the psychology of its actions in the United Kingdom to its best advantage, so that Russians in the United Kingdom are afraid. Europol, that's really important, and it's very interesting. The people who are accused, allegedly the people who took the attack on Sergei Skripal in Salisbury in March of this year, it was Europol that has issued an arrest warrant against these people. It is Russia who said on no account will it deliver them to the United Kingdom, like the people who are believed to have assassinated Sasha Litvinenko. So
can I
two
just,
different organizations. Yeah, please.
Sorry, can I just put in a follow-on question to the one you've just been answering? Article 3 of Interpol's constitution forbids any intervention or activities of a political, military, religious or racial character. And that is the charge that's being put at Russia's door, isn't it? That it is doing precisely that with its red notices, for instance, for Bill Browder, but not just. And not just Russia, of course, other countries doing the same thing as well.
Well, I think this is right. And your previous interviewee said, well, the Russians weren't too upset about this. My understanding is that the Russian media actually have reacted very badly to the decision to appoint a South Korean and have talked about Russophobia. So it is seen as a blow at the Kremlin. But the fact of the matter is that unfortunately, and it could be our own fault in the West for failing to give the hand of friendship to Russia over the past 10 years when it was merited. I couldn't comment on that. But the fact of the matter is today, we, particularly in the United Kingdom, regard Russian action as essentially hostile, as adversarial. And therefore, the idea that a country like the United Kingdom, and yes, foolishly, because of Brexit, we're getting out of Europol, it would seem, but nevertheless, we strongly believe in an international, rules-based, lawful system, and abusing even something like the red notices for political advantage to frighten individuals, that would be completely unacceptable to British public opinion. I don't think a British government would accept it. And it's interesting, of course, that in America, we haven't heard anything from President Trump on this, but senior members of Congress have certainly said exactly the same thing. This is not possible. This is putting the fox in charge, or would have been to put the fox in charge of the henhouse.
Anthony Glees of the University of Buckingham, many thanks for joining us here on France 24.